58, the amended Schedule 9 is agreed to. The question now is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part. The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Chairman, I'd like to speak to those, and I think this is probably the appropriate time also to speak to my amendment, which is set out on Supplementary Order Paper 32, dated yesterday on this bill. And to make it clear, the effect of the amendment is to delay the commencement of Part 3 by 3 years in order to give the opportunity to the government to fulfil its commitment to have the review of the Charities Act and in particular the Charities Commission before, in fact, the Charities Commission is disestablished, because I think members here are of the view on this side of the House that it is better not to review things after they've been disestablished. It is better to review them, to see if they're working, to see if they've come up to speed, to see if there can be changes made to them in order for them to work properly, and in order to do it is better to do that before the disestablishment, rather than doing the disestablishment and reviewing something which then, Mr Speaker, doesn't exist anymore. It seems to be relatively pointless to do a review of an already disestablished organisation, and therefore the effect of this is to delay the commencement of Part 3 so it doesn't come into force until the day 3 years after the date on which this Act receives the royal assent. So, sort of working on the possibility, the likelihood that this bill gets a third reading, gets a royal assent at some stage in June. That then runs the Charities Commission through a period of the review, and that then is the point at which we go forward. Now, there was a debate on our side whether, in fact, we should move an amendment as far as Part 2 of the bill is concerned. And I know that there are some strongly held views around the House, and I heard the member Kevin Hay speaking eloquently on Part 2 of the bill earlier, and I invite him or any of his colleagues, if they want to amend my amendment to include a delay for Part 2 as well, in order to keep the Mental Health Foundation and its work going for a period. It might well be a good idea for them to get one drafted up, copied off, put 10 copies or 15, I think 10 copies photocopied onto the table of the House, so members can, in their debate, consider it, and then there will be the ability to consider that question. I think we have come to the point, Mr Chairman, where there is acceptance in the House around Part 1, and therefore it is logical to have it coming into force at the beginning of the financial year. I'm one of those people who still sometimes think, for purposes of legislation, of the old financial year, which used to finish on the 31st of March back in the old days, and the 1st of April was a new financial year. And I know for a number of companies that is the case. But as far as government departments are concerned and government budgets are concerned, the budgets are 1st of July to 30th of June, and therefore it is pretty hard to make a case for a change in the coming into the force of the section of the Act or the section of the bill that we accept should come into the Act. Mr Chairman, I do want to go to the explanatory note and the reasoning behind the delay, and that is the agreement that was made between the government and the charitable sector with the formation of the Charities Commission, and the agreement that it would be independent. That was fundamental to the Crown sector agreement made in 2005, and while it's not, I'm not going to pretend it's an agreement of the status of the Treaty of Waitangi, it is something that was a serious agreement between a very large sector, a sector which is very much voluntary, Mr. Chairman.
Call the Honourable Trevor Mallon.
And where a lot of organisations and individuals have been involved, and they go, I think, from the people who do the relatively small collections for the RSA and a number of with the poppies and other areas for the charitable funds to be raised by the RSA. There's people like the Foundation for the Blind. There are a number of collections. We do plunket collections, and there are a number of organisations which are either charitable in themselves or have wings which have charitable status, and they were the ones who were involved in this treaty, this agreement, after a lot of discussion with the government. I think it's unlikely, given the legislation that's around, that failure to abide by this agreement will result in anything that looks like a treaty claim, although I think it is fair to say, with the activist Supreme Court that we've got, it is slightly unpredictable. And I see the Attorney General nodding. He's going to sleep. Oh, I see. Well, he should try and stay awake at 9 o'clock at night, Mr. Chairman. But I think there are a number of us have seen some decisions from the Supreme Court that have been slightly unpredictable, and whether or not the Supreme Court would regard this as a matter for their review and their intervention, given the treaty arrangements that existed in 2005 that are referred to in this supplementary order paper that goes to the date. It's a moot question. It's a moot question, and I'm not sure which way that they would be likely to go. Now, without referring back into the bits that have already been passed, Mr. Chairman, there is a requirement to consult with charitable entities, and the board, which is set up, and the chief executive of both of the board and the department have to have a consultation with the entities that are within the sector. And my question is, what consultation has occurred with them to date in advance of the passing of this bill? Sorry? No, I know they had it. It was actually a little bit of a mess because of the way that my understanding the legislation was brought in before the election, and no one understood the requirement to make submission before the election, and then subsequent to that there was not a calling for submissions again, and there was confusion. But that's, sorry to the member, that's not the point that I was making, because that would be outside this particular clause. The proposed amendment goes to the delay, and the question is, if this amendment is passed, would the Minister make a commitment to do that consultation with the sector at that point? That is an opportunity to have the consultation and to do what we expect would be done in order to make this legislation work properly. My view is, Mr. Chairman, that there's a real possibility that the government don't like this particular clause, because it would require them to have a period of 3 years, and it is slightly unpredictable what might happen in that 3 years, and it might, they might consider it slightly untidy. But I want to say to the Minister that there are, that every now and again there's tidiness and there's principles, and it would be good for the Minister to accept the principle of consultation with a sector, Mr Chairman, before precipitating the sort of change, the quite, well, a very serious change, because this is, this is the abolition of a commission. Now, albeit, I do accept it's going to be replaced by a board, and there is a certain amount of what's in a title, but there's certainly an indication of autonomy. There is a difference in autonomy as Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister Jonathan Collins.
Mr Chair, I think this is a very disappointing SOP.